So what does this mean for Israel and issues that are important to Israelis and diaspora Jews as well? With me now in studio is Marc Schulman, who's a Newsweek columnist and editor-in-chief of History Central. Also with me is Uri Pilichowski, who is a political commentator, joining us from the Mitzpe-Jericho settlement in the West Bank. Marc, I want to start with you with that simple question. Would a Joe Biden presidency be good for Israel? Would the impact positive?
Absolutely, because it'll make America strong again. America's become weak in this last 3.5 years. Everything that President Trump has done has weakened America on the world scene. We looked at the vote in the UN Security Council. No one will vote with the United States because everybody is angry at the United States. He practically destroyed NATO. He destroyed any sort of multilateralism. And he's done crazy things when it comes to pulling troops out, not pulling troops out in Syria and other places. The reality is, Israel is strong when America is strong, and I don't care whether he says nice things about Israel and even moves the embassy to Jerusalem. The reality is President Trump has weakened America on the world scene. When America is weak, Israel ends up being weak.
Ori, do you have a response?
Yeah, first of all, I agree that Vice President Biden will be positive for Israel. I think there is a reality to recognize the progressive part of the Democratic Party that's pulling him away from Israel. And a record in the Biden and the Obama-Biden administration that wasn't exactly 100% pro-Israel, and a lot of problems that we had there. But I think Mark left out this momentous peace deal that President Trump just made and how positive President Trump has been for Israel. So I think it's impossible to just disqualify that and say that Vice President Biden is our only hope. I think that Israel wins in both cases.
And Mark, can you touch on that, the fact that under President Trump, we now have U.S. official recognition of the capital of Jerusalem, sovereignty in the Golan Heights. We have President Trump brokering a new normalization pact with Israel and the UAE. Could be other normalization pacts in the months ahead. This seems like a positive development.
All of those things are positive developments for Israel. I'm not going to take that away. But I'll say most of those things are statements. They're not real facts in the sense. I mean, yes, moving the embassy, or at least part of the embassy, to Jerusalem is an actual fact. But the reality is those are nice statements, those are nice things, but in the world of real politics, what's important is power, what's important is influence, and those are things that really count. As far as the UAE, yeah, that is positive. I wrote a column and I said we have to give all credit to at least Jared Kushner for managing to realize that annexation wasn't going to work at this point, and this was going to be a solution that everyone could rely on and everyone could be happy with, and it got Prime Minister Netanyahu to climb down from his tree, and it got this situation to work. And it's a good thing, it's a positive thing, and it might bring other positive things. It's not to say what would have happened in 3.5 years if someone else had been president, of course.
I want to move to Iran here because, of course, Joe Biden, who was then vice president under President Obama, helped orchestrate the Iran nuclear deal, the P5+1 pact that existed for a few years to stem Iran's nuclear program. President Trump, of course, pulled out of that deal. Here's what candidate Joe Biden said about the Iran deal while campaigning a few months ago.
If Tehran returns to compliance with the deal, I would rejoin the agreement and work with our allies to strengthen and extend it while more effectively pushing back against Iran's destabilizing activities, which under the agreement we were allowed to do and we had partners to do with us.
Or your reaction to that President Joe Biden might return to the Iran nuclear deal? What does it mean?
I think the Iran deal was a horrible idea. I think it did not secure Israel at all. I think it put it in a much more precarious position, both in terms of Iran's nuclear deal, its support of terrorism, its development of ballistic missiles. I think the Iran deal was a really bad idea, and to go back to it, I think it's just a horrible idea. It puts Israel's safety at risk, and I hope that never happens.
Mark, your response.
I disagree because, listen, I didn't think it was a perfect deal, but the reality was the best deal that they could get at the time. It pushed away, the day that Iran could get nuclear weapons. It was never designed to solve all of the other problems, and it didn't. The reality is by pulling out of the deal, there's never been Plan B, and that was always the problem with the Trump plan. They pulled out maximum pressure. Maximum pressure hasn't worked. Maybe someday it will, who knows, but it has not worked. They've continued to develop nuclear weapons as we speak, and we've lost all of our allies in our attempt to try to rein in Iran. I mean, the idea that we're going to have a snapback now is what the Trump administration is saying because the UN Security Council didn't agree is never going to stand because the United States withdrew from the agreement, so it's no longer a party to that agreement. Yeah, you can make any sort of arguments you want. No one is going to pay any attention to the United States right now. Now, is the nuclear nuclear plan a good plan? The problem with it is it's sunset. If Joe Biden works to re-enter it and eliminates the sunset clause, then that's all great. I mean, right now we have no other alternative. Our alternative is to bomb them.
Yeah, Uri, I see you shaking your head there. You don't agree with this analysis.
No, not at all. Mark's contradicting himself. He's saying, and I respect Mark tremendously, but on the one hand, he's saying maximum pressure won't work. On the other hand, he's saying that Vice President Biden will be able to use maximum pressure to get Iran to renegotiate the parts of the deal that were bad for us. It's one or the other, and that's President Trump's entire strategy, and it is working. Iran is feeling weak, and now with the UAE deal, it's going to feel even weaker, and it's going to put Iran in a position of weakness where we can go ahead and pressure it to then reformulate the deal. It's exactly what Mark is saying, except using the Trump moves to be able to do it.
No, except there's only one problem with that. At the moment, we have neither China, nor Europe, nor Russia, or anyone else going along with us. They're all trading with Iran on the side. Maximum pressure is only maximum pressure for the United States. The United States has a lot of pressure because it controls a good deal of the foreign currency system in the world, so it does have a lot of pressure to exert.
And we are seeing protests against the Iranian regime.
Oh, for sure. Listen, there's been protests going on for the longest time, but, after what happened in Syria, we have to give, anyone who's about to take on the Iranian regime after seeing what happened to the Syrian protesters has to be either the bravest or stupidest people on earth at this point. Now, I wish they would be an uprising against the Iranians. There's no question that it's a terrible, terrible regime, and they deserve to be relegated to the dustbin of history. But just because we want it doesn't mean it's going to happen. And yes, the economic pressure is making the situation worse. And of course, we can't forget the corona is hitting the country very, very badly. The two together might have an effect. But listen, maximum pressure has been going on for 2.5 years. We have not seen any real change in their policy. And on the other hand, we have all the Europeans, Russia and China, who are willing to trade with them, willing to work with them. So it makes it very, very difficult.
Uri, I want to note in that Biden's soundbite, he has said if Iran complies, if they return to the deal, then we would also return, we'd be a party again. But it seems like perhaps that ship has sailed. If Iran doesn't stop its nuclear research at Natanz and other places, then it's over. So do you think that Biden could be tough on Iran moving forward?
I don't know how. I don't know what magic powder he would have that President Trump isn't currently doing. That's something that the Biden campaign has never explained. It just keeps saying, we'll go back to the deal, we'll be able to get them to renegotiate, and then we'll get better terms. And as Mark said, under President Obama, they weren't able to get better terms. And if nothing's changed, and if maximum pressure, like Mark is saying, isn't working, then it won't. And if the only way to get them to change is maximum pressure, well, that's exactly President Trump's entire strategy. So I'm not sure what the Biden administration or Biden campaign is planning on doing differently than President Trump. And President Trump's already doing it, and it is successful, so why stop?
I want to just change gears here if we could, and we'll move to the issue of settlement annexation, the Trump peace plan. I want to note, of course, that Joe Biden has a long-standing personal connection to the Middle East and to Israel. He was vice president under President Barack Obama. He's been to Israel many times. He has a personal relationship, of course, with Israel's president and prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. Here's what Joe Biden said a few years ago, the last time he was in Israel.
Partnerships with Israel are in many fronts, but central to that is that security partnership which we have. So I hope to discuss with you, Mr. President, ideas that will help reduce extremism and achieve greater economic opportunity for both Israelis and Palestinians alike.
Uri, Netanyahu has promised to annex settlements to extend sovereignty into the West Bank. Your thoughts on if Joe Biden wins?
If Joe Biden wins, that's not going to happen. Vice President Biden has been very clear that American support will not be extended to Israel for extending its sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. And I don't know how Israel goes ahead and does that without American support. How would it be able to forestall sanctions in the United Nations Security Council? So I think that it needs American support. If Vice President Biden gets elected, then we can say goodbye to extending sovereignty.
Do you agree, Mark?
I agree 100%. I mean, that's part of the reason I'm happy Biden would be elected, because I'm against extending sovereignty.
But then what do you think a Biden presidency would do differently with regards to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Under President Obama, Vice President Biden, there was a settlement freeze in Ariel. There was an effort under John Kerry to get both sides to everything fell apart.
Everything fell apart. The Palestinians said no like they always say no. And that's the reason everything fell apart, because the Palestinians don't know when to say yes. I don't expect it to be that different. I expect another attempt to be made, maybe this time with the pressure from the Gulf and a reset and say that Biden is now president. The Palestinians might be willing to come to some sort of negotiations. I don't know. I'm not someone who believes that we're going to reach peace anytime soon, again, because the Palestinians, regardless of what we do, we have a second party that has to negotiate with. I think the feeling will be a little bit different. There'll be a different feeling in the air, so to speak, and there'll be an attempt to reach out, and probably they'll reopen the consulate in East Jerusalem for the Palestinians.
But if and both of you agree that there won't be formal extension of sovereignty, how would a Biden president, and we don't know who a possible Secretary of State would be, but how would they react to ongoing construction, expansion in some of the blocks?
Look, I think it really depends on what that means. If it's done quietly, they're going to look the other way like the American administrations have done for 2 generations at this point. If someone makes a big public announcement and does a lot of noise about it, they'll do their normal thing and attack it and say settlements are against the peace process going forward.
All right, Uri, your reaction to that. What would happen if settlements expand?
I think there's one difference that's going to happen under a Biden administration, which is the aggressive, progressive left-wing part of the Democratic Party, which is going to push for more action towards a Palestinian state. I think that's a huge difference in terms of color of what's happening within the Democratic Party now. And I think that we're going to have to be very careful about that, be very wary about that. Even though I would agree that Vice President Biden left on his own, that wouldn't be a part of his administration. I think he would be, as Mark said, would act as other administrations have in the past. But I don't think that the Biden administration will be able to stand up that much to the progressive wing of its party and not be able to take some action and pressure Israel. And that's something that I'm very worried about.
All right, we'll have to leave this discussion here. Uri, Mark, really appreciate the discussion. Of course, the U.S. presidential election 76 days away. National polls show Joe Biden with a comfortable 9 or 10-point lead, according to most national polls. But the lead has been tightening a bit in recent weeks, and it remains to be seen exactly how perhaps the normalization between Israel and other Gulf countries could impact the public perception among voters. Marc, Uri, thank you so much. Great to have you here on the studio.